the neighbor who waved every morning. The curtain across the street did not open at 7:15. Harold Bennett noticed it a few seconds late. That was the strange part. At first, his mind simply moved through the routine without questioning it. Coffee in his right hand, kitchen window, morning light on the quiet street, the pale blue curtains in the house across the road. Then the small missing thing arrived. The curtains had not moved. For 12 years, almost every weekday morning, they had opened at nearly the same minute, 7:15. Not exactly every time, but close enough that Harold's body had learned the rhythm without asking his permission. The curtains would part. Milton Ashworth would appear in the opposite window. A hand would rise. Harold would raise his own hand back. Then both men would turn away and continue the rest of their separate lives. That was all. A wave, nothing more. At least, that was what Harold had always told himself. He stood there now with his coffee cooling in his hand. Across the street, Milton's curtains remained closed. Harold glanced at the clock on the stove. 7:18. He took a sip of coffee. Too cold already. Running late, he said to the empty kitchen. Older men slept in sometimes. Harold was 58 himself. He knew that routines could slip. He knew a person could lose a few minutes without it meaning anything. But by 7:40, the curtain still had not opened. By 8:10, Harold had stopped pretending he was not watching. He stood at the kitchen window with one hand resting on the counter and did the small, ridiculous math in his head. 5 mornings a week, 12 years. Rain, snow, summer heat, garbage trucks, school buses, bad weather, good weather, nearly 3,000 waves, 3,000 small greetings between two men who had never once had a real conversation. Harold knew Milton's last name because a neighbor had mentioned it years ago. He knew Milton had served in the military because someone else had said it at a block barbecue. He knew Milton lived alone. He knew the curtains were blue. That was almost everything. He did not know Milton's middle name. He did not know whether Milton took cream in his coffee. He did not know what books he read, or if he read at all. He did not know whether Milton had children. He did not know why the wave had started. He only knew that at 7:15, every weekday morning, Milton had been there. And now he was not. At 8:37, Harold walked into the hallway. He told himself he was going to get his jacket. Instead, he stopped in front of the framed letter on the wall. He had walked past that letter almost every day for 15 years without really seeing it. It had belonged to his mother before it belonged to him. A letter from Vietnam, from a soldier who had known Harold's father. Everett Bennett had died when Harold was 7 years old. The official telegram had arrived first. Cold, brief, flat. Then, several weeks later, this second letter came. Handwritten, personal. A young soldier trying to give a widow and a small boy something more human than government language. Harold could still recite the final line from memory. I will look out for your boy, whatever it takes, for as long as I am able. The hardest promises are the ones nobody ever asks you to keep, and I intend to keep this one anyway. The letter was signed only with 2 initials, M.A. Harold's mother had never learned who M.A. was. She had wondered for the rest of her life. Then she died. Harold inherited the letter, and he did exactly what she had done. He kept it, framed it, honored it, and never tried very hard to solve it. Some mysteries, he had decided long ago, were easier to treasure than to open. A knock came from across the street. No, not a knock. A car door. Harold turned back toward the window. An ambulance was pulling into Milton's driveway. No siren. Only lights turning silently against the morning. Harold did not move. 2 paramedics went inside. The blue curtains stayed closed. By 9, They wheeled a covered stretcher down Milton's front walk. Harold stood in his own kitchen and watched. He felt grief move through his chest before he had time to decide whether he had a right to it. That surprised him. Grief, for a man he had never really known. Grief, maybe, for the fact that he had never walked across the street while there was still time. That Sunday, his daughter Denise called. She always called on Sunday. Denise was 31, married, with 2 young children, and living 3 hours away. She worried about Harold in the careful, exhausted way adult children worry about parents who refuse to be helped. "How are you doing, Dad?" "I'm fine." "You always say that." "That's because I usually am." Denise was quiet for half a second. Harold could hear one of the children in the background. Then she said, "You know you don't have to be fine all the time." He leaned against the kitchen counter. Across the street, Milton's house looked sealed. "I know. Do you?" Harold almost told her about the curtains. He almost told her about the ambulance. He almost told her that he had stood in the hallway looking at the old Vietnam letter before the paramedics arrived. But old habits rose quickly, like a hand going up at a window, small, safe, enough to acknowledge someone without letting them any closer. "My neighbor passed away," Harold said. "Oh, Dad, I'm sorry. Were you close?" Harold looked at the empty house. "No," he said, "not really." The answer was true. It also felt like a lie. Milton Ashworth's funeral was held the following Thursday at a small chapel 10 minutes from the neighborhood. Harold almost did not go. He stood in front of his closet that morning holding a dark jacket and told himself there was no reason to attend. Milton had family, probably friends, people who knew his stories, people who could speak about him properly. Harold had only a wave, but in the end, that was exactly why he went. A man who had shown up every morning for 12 years deserved at least one person from across the street to show up once for him. There were around 30 people in the chapel, fewer than Harold expected. He sat near the back. A program rested in his hands. Milton James Ashworth. So that was the middle name. James. Not that it mattered. Or maybe it did. Harold stared at the name longer than necessary. A man in his 50s stood to give the eulogy. Gerald Ashworth, Milton's son. Harold felt a small flash of embarrassment. 12 years of waving, and he had not known Milton had a son. Gerald spoke softly, not polished, not dramatic, but steady. "My father was not an easy man to know," Gerald said. "Not because he was unkind. He was kind, but quiet. Quiet in a way that could make you think nothing important was happening inside him." A few people nodded. Harold looked down at his hands. "My father served 2 tours in Vietnam," Gerald continued. "He almost never talked about it. But when he did, he talked about the men who did not come home, the men he felt he still owed, the families he felt he had never properly served." Harold went still. Gerald took a breath. "He used to say something when I was growing up. I heard it all my life and never fully understood it." Harold's fingers tightened around the funeral program. Gerald said, "The hardest promises are the ones nobody ever asks you to keep." The chapel seemed to lose sound. Harold stared at the front of the room. Gerald kept speaking, but Harold barely heard the next sentence. The phrase had not been similar. It had not been close. It was the line from the letter. The framed letter in Harold's hallway. The letter signed M.A. Milton Ashworth. M.A. Harold told himself not to make a story out of coincidence. He told himself grief could cause strange connections. He told himself that many people might have said that phrase, but his chest had gone cold. After the service, a reception was held in a small hall beside the chapel. There was coffee, store-bought cookies, a table of photographs. Harold stood in front of them, longer than he meant to. Milton as an old man, Milton with Gerald as a child, Milton beside a woman who must have been his wife, Milton in a military uniform, young, unsure, serious. Then another photograph, faded, informal, Vietnam, judging by the uniforms and the jungle behind the men. A younger Milton stood beside another soldier, both laughing at something outside the frame. Harold leaned closer. The second man had dark hair, a narrow face, a smile Harold had seen only in old family photographs. His father, Everett Bennett. Harold's breath caught. He reached toward the picture, then stopped himself before touching it. Gerald was across the room, speaking to someone. Harold wanted to approach him. Instead, he left. He drove home with both hands tight on the steering wheel. Inside his house, he walked straight to the hallway. He took down the framed letter. For the first time in years, he read the whole thing instead of only remembering it. Everett was kind. Everett made men laugh when they were frightened. Everett had spoken of his wife and little boy. Everett had wanted to come home. I will look out for your boy, whatever it takes, for as long as I am able. The hardest promises are the ones nobody ever asks you to keep. M.A. Harold sat on the hallway floor with the letter in his lap. He was 7 again, waiting for a father who would not return. 51 years had passed, and, for the first time, the initials at the bottom of that letter felt less like a mystery and more like a door. Harold did not call Gerald that day. He did not call the next day either. For nearly 3 weeks, he carried the suspicion privately. He told himself he was respecting the family's grief. He told himself it would be intrusive to appear with an old letter and a theory. He told himself he might be wrong. All of that was partly true, but Harold knew the deeper truth by the second week. He was afraid. Afraid the answer would be nothing. Afraid the answer would be everything. Afraid that if he asked, the story he had kept safely framed on a wall for most of his life would become real enough to hurt. So he did what he always did. He held the important thing alone. Every morning, he still stood at the kitchen window at 7:15. Habit pulled him there. The blue curtains remained closed. The absence became its own ritual. He saw the house. He saw the empty window. He saw all the mornings he had not crossed the street. On the next Sunday call, Denise asked, "Have you been sleeping?" "Yes." "Dad." "What?" "You always answer too fast when you're not telling me the truth." Harold almost smiled. Then he looked at the framed letter, now resting on the kitchen table, instead of the hallway wall. "There's something strange about Milton," he said. Denise went quiet. "The neighbor?" "Yes." "What do you mean?" He looked at the letter. He wanted to tell her. The words rose. Then the old door inside him closed. "I'm not sure yet. Dad, I'll tell you when I know." Denise sighed softly. "Please don't make me learn what you were feeling from a box after you're gone." The sentence landed hard. Harold did not answer. Denise's voice softened. "I don't mean that cruelly. I just don't want to keep guessing at you." After the call ended, Harold sat at the kitchen table for a long time. Then he picked up the framed letter. The next morning, he drove to the local library. He had not done research like that in years. A librarian helped him access military records. Harold gave her the little information he had. Everett Bennett, Vietnam. Unit numbers from old documents his mother had kept. Possible initials, M.A. He searched for an hour, then 2. Old unit rosters, veterans archives, photographs from reunions. At first, the results blurred together. Then he saw the name, Milton Ashworth. Same service window, same broad location, same unit designation. Harold pulled out the funeral program from his jacket pocket and compared the dates. Then he searched images from a veterans reunion page. There it was. Milton, older, same cap, Same patch Harold had seen in the photograph at the reception. M.A. Milton Ashworth. Harold sat back from the computer. The library around him stayed quiet. A teenager typed at another table. Someone turned pages in a newspaper. Life continued as if Harold had not just watched 50 years of family history rearrange itself on a public computer screen. He called Gerald from the parking lot. His hands shook as he dialed. Gerald answered after 5 rings. "Mr. Ashworth, this is Harold Bennett. I lived across from your father." "Yes," Gerald said. "I remember you from the service. I need to ask you something. It may sound strange." Harold looked at the framed letter on the passenger seat. "My father died in Vietnam. His name was Everett Bennett. After his death, my mother received a letter from someone who served with him. It was signed M.A. There was silence. Harold continued. "At your father's service, you said a phrase about hard promises. It was in that letter." Gerald did not speak for several seconds. Then he said, "Can you come by tomorrow?" Harold closed his eyes. "Yes, bring the letter," Gerald said. "I think I need to see it." The next morning, Harold crossed the street for the first time with purpose. That detail struck him halfway across. For 12 years, he had crossed the street for block meetings, snow shoveling, mail mix-ups, and once to borrow a ladder from another neighbor, but never to knock on Milton's door, never to ask the man in the window who he was. Gerald opened the door. He looked tired. The house behind him smelled faintly of dust, old wood, and coffee. "My father's study is this way," Gerald said. The study was small, crowded. Photographs on the walls, military mementos, books, a folded flag in a case, a filing cabinet in the corner. It was a whole life Harold had never seen from across the street. Gerald took the framed letter. He read it standing near the desk. At first his face remained careful. Then something changed. Recognition, pain, a kind of understanding he had not been ready for. "That is his handwriting," Gerald said. Harold felt the first piece lock into place. Gerald touched the bottom of the letter, the capital letters. "He wrote them like that my whole life." He read the final line again, "the hardest promises." Gerald looked up. "I heard him say that sentence for as long as I can remember. He never told me where it came from." Harold's voice came out unsteady. "Your father knew mine." Gerald nodded slowly. "I think he did." He walked to the filing cabinet and opened the top drawer. He removed a thin folder. The edges were worn. The folder looked as if it had been opened many times, then put away with care. "My father gave this to me when I was in my 20s, Gerald said. "He told me to keep it. He said if anything happened to him, and if I ever needed to understand who he really was, I should read it." He handed the folder to Harold. Harold opened it. The first photograph stopped him. 2 young soldiers stood shoulder to shoulder in the heat. One was Milton. The other was Everett Bennett. Harold had never seen his father like that. Not as a formal portrait. Not as a name on a telegram. Not as a framed memory in his mother's hallway. Alive, laughing, arm thrown loosely around Milton's shoulder. Harold touched the edge of the photograph. "That's him," he whispered. "My father wrote their names on the back." Harold turned it over. Milton and Everett, 3 weeks before the hill. The hill. Harold looked at Gerald. Gerald handed him the next sheet. It was a handwritten account. Milton's handwriting, older than the letter to Harold's mother, but unmistakably the same. Harold read slowly. Milton described Everett's final day, not in military language, not with polished heroism, with the careful pain of a man trying to tell the truth without making it unbearable. Everett had been frightened. Everyone had been frightened. He had helped carry a wounded man before the second attack. He had made a joke that made 3 men laugh when none of them should have been able to. Then there was chaos, smoke, noise, a last moment Milton could not prevent. Harold had lived 51 years with only the official version. Killed in action. Now he had a human one. His father had been afraid. His father had been brave anyway. His father had laughed that morning. His father had spoken about coming home. Harold had to sit down. Gerald waited. He did not fill the silence. After a long time, Harold said, "My mother wondered who wrote the letter until the day she died." Gerald looked down. "My father wondered about your family until the day he died." The second piece locked into place. Gerald sat across from him. "He told me he made a promise after Everett died. To your mother, to you. He said he would look out for Everett's boy as long as he could. He never met us. No, not then." Gerald folded his hands. "He tried to find out where your family settled." "This was before everything was easy to search. He found your mother's address through Veterans Outreach records sometime in the late 70s. But by then you were grown. You had a life. He said showing up out of nowhere would have turned the promise into a burden." Harold looked toward the window. Across the street, his own house was visible through the trees. "So he did nothing?" "No," Gerald said. "He waited." Harold turned back. Gerald's voice became quieter. "When he retired 12 years ago, he looked for a house on your street." The room seemed to tilt. "He what?" "He looked specifically on your street. I did not understand why at the time. He told me only near the end." Harold could not speak. Gerald continued. "He said it was the only honest way left to keep the promise. Not to insert himself into your life, not to ask for gratitude, not to make you carry an old soldier's guilt, just to be present, to know you were alive, to be there in the smallest possible way, every day, for as long as he had left." Harold saw it all at once. Milton opening the curtains, Milton raising his hand, Milton standing across the street through winter mornings and summer heat, not as a casual neighbor, not as a lonely old man passing time, as a promise, kept quietly, for 12 years. "He waved at me every morning," Harold said. His voice broke. "I thought that was nothing." Gerald's eyes were wet now too. "I don't think it was nothing to him." Harold covered his mouth with one hand. All those mornings, all those waves, all those chances to cross the street. And Milton, who had chosen the distance on purpose, close enough to show up, far enough not to ask anything in return. Harold had known loneliness. He had known grief. But this was different. This was the shock of being loved in a form so quiet he had mistaken it for habit. Harold drove home that afternoon and sat in his driveway for almost 20 minutes. The pale blue curtains across the street were closed. But now they looked different, not empty, not ordinary, like the last visible edge of a life's work. He did not call Denise immediately. For 2 days, he carried the revelation alone. Then, on the third evening, he found himself sitting at the kitchen table with his phone in his hand. The framed letter was beside him. The folder copies Gerald had made were spread out across the table. Everett's photograph, Milton's account, the promise. Harold recognized the old instinct. Keep it private. Make sense of it alone. Tell people later. Maybe never. Then he heard Denise's voice. "Please don't make me learn what you were feeling from a box after you're gone." He called her. "Dad, I need to tell you something." She heard his tone and went quiet. Harold told her everything. This time, not the small version, not the practical version, the whole story. The curtains, the ambulance, the funeral, the phrase, the letter, the library, Gerald, the photograph of Everett laughing beside Milton, the folder, the promise, the house across the street, the wave. When he finished, Denise did not speak for a long time. Then she said, "Dad, this is the most you have told me about anything in years. I know. Maybe ever." Harold looked at the photograph of his father. "I think I have spent my whole life doing what Milton did," he said, "standing close enough to be seen, but not close enough to be known." Denise's voice softened. "Milton had a reason." "Yes," Harold said, "and I think I have been using that as an excuse, even though mine was just fear. Can I come this weekend?" His automatic answer rose immediately. "You do not have to. I am fine. It is a long drive. I can handle it." Harold let the answer rise. Then he let it pass. "Yes," he said, "I would like that." Denise arrived Saturday morning. She brought coffee and a bag of pastries neither of them ate. They sat at the kitchen table with the letter between them. For the first time in years, Harold spoke about his father, not the official version, not the simple version, fragments. Everett lifting him onto his shoulders, Everett's laugh, a smell of motor oil on his uniform, a hand ruffling Harold's hair, the day the telegram came, his mother's face, the quiet that swallowed the house afterward. I don't think I ever mourned him as an adult, Harold said. His voice trembled. I think I decided he was too far back to still hurt. Denise reached across the table and held his hand. And Mom? Harold looked away. For a moment, the old door almost closed. Then he forced himself to keep speaking. I did the same thing with your mother, he said. Managed the appointments, paid the bills, picked up prescriptions, changed sheets, fixed everything I could fix. He swallowed. But I don't think I let either of you see how scared I was. Not her, not you. Denise's eyes filled. She knew you loved her. I know. That does not mean she did not want to hear you say what hurt. Harold nodded. I know that too. The words cost him more than he expected. But once they were said, the room felt less sealed. Denise looked toward the window. Do you wish you had crossed the street? All the time. What would you have said? Harold looked across at Milton's house. I don't know. That's the part that bothers me. I don't even know what question I would have started with. Maybe hello would have been enough. He almost smiled. Maybe. That afternoon, Harold and Denise walked across the street together. Gerald opened the door. The three of them sat in Milton's study. Gerald showed Denise the photographs. Denise held the picture of Everett and Milton for a long time. I never saw my grandfather alive, she said quietly. Harold understood what she meant. She had seen photographs, but not like this. Not laughing. Not human. Not young and unaware of what was coming. Gerald gave her a copy. My father would have wanted you to have it, he said. Harold looked at him. Thank you. Gerald nodded, but Harold understood the thank you was too small. Some things could not be answered with gratitude alone. They could only be carried forward differently. Over the next several months, Harold visited Gerald often. At first, it was because of the story. There were more photographs, a few more notes, small details about Everett that Milton had preserved without knowing whether anyone would ever ask for them. But gradually, the visits became something else. Coffee, conversations, small repairs around the house. Gerald asking about Harold's woodworking. Harold asking about Gerald's children. A friendship growing out of a promise neither of them had made, but both of them had inherited. One afternoon, Harold sat in Milton's study and looked at the window facing his own house. I keep thinking about all the mornings I could have walked over, he said. Gerald followed his gaze. I do not know if he would have let you in. Harold looked at him. Gerald smiled sadly. I mean that kindly. I think my father chose that distance carefully. The wave was close enough to keep the promise, but far enough that you never had to carry it. That is a strange kind of love. Yes, Gerald said, but maybe not as rare as we think. Harold was quiet. Gerald added, a lot of people love from a distance because closeness would require language they never learned. Harold looked at him. You mean me? I mean both our fathers, Gerald said, and maybe us too, if we are not careful. Harold sat with that. A year earlier, he might have changed the subject. Instead, he said, I'm trying not to be that man anymore. Gerald nodded. I know. Nearly a year after Milton's death, Harold stood at his kitchen window again at 7:15. He still kept the habit, but it no longer felt the same. Across the street, Milton's house belonged to a young family now. Gerald had sold it in the spring. The blue curtains were gone. The new ones had a small green pattern. A child's bicycle leaned against the porch railing. A red ball rested near the steps. Harold had gone over the week the family moved in. He introduced himself properly. He learned their names, Ava and Chris, 2 children, Molly and Ben. He brought a small wooden step stool he had made in the garage. because the little boy could not quite reach the porch light switch and had been jumping for it when Harold first met them. He told them briefly about Milton. Not the whole story, not yet, but enough that the house did not feel erased. On this morning, Ava opened the front door carrying a lunchbox. She saw Harold in the window and smiled. She raised a hand. The old instinct moved through him. Raise the hand back. Smile. Let the moment be enough. Harold did raise his hand. Then he stopped. He looked at the coffee in his hand. He looked at the house across the street. He thought of Milton. He thought of Everett. He thought of his mother reading the letter out loud. He thought of Denise saying she did not want to keep guessing at him. Then Harold set the coffee cup on the counter. He took his jacket from the chair. He crossed the kitchen, opened the front door, and walked across the street. Ava was still on the porch, surprised to see him. "Morning," Harold said. "Morning." He nodded toward the bicycle. "Ben's tire looked a little low yesterday. I've got a pump in the garage if you need one." Ava smiled. "That would actually be great." Harold looked once toward the window where Milton used to stand. For 12 years, a man had shown up for him without asking to be known. Harold understood now that the smallest gesture could carry a life. But he also understood something else. A wave could be beautiful. A wave could be faithful. A wave could keep a promise. But it did not have to be the end of the conversation. This time, Harold did not only wave, he stayed. This video is a dramatized narrative inspired by real human emotions, experiences, and life-changing moments. Any resemblance to specific people or events is coincidental. Closing question for comments. Is there someone in your life, a neighbor, a coworker, or a familiar face, with whom you have shared only a small daily gesture? And have you ever wondered what might be underneath it?